Hello, I'm John Bolton. My family purchased a home and property on the shores of Lake Ontario in Rochester, New York in 1937, and we've enjoyed many years of lake living and all that it had to offer. However, I am furious and mad as hell that we are being flooded out of our homes because of this man-made crisis. To exactly understand how we got into this situation and why this is man-made, all we have to do is look at some history of these actions. It all started in the mid-1800s. In 1848, the city of Chicago was facing a plague, and during that time, they dug a canal between Lake Michigan and the Mississippi River system. And the purpose of that was to flush all of the sewage and disease and waste down the Mississippi into the rural Midwest. But by doing so, they then created a navigable path and commerce between Lake Michigan and the Mississippi River. Almost 100 years, this favored all the residents around the lower lakes. We had beaches, and it was a great place to live from the mid-1800s up until the mid-1940s. But that all changed. In 1903, man-made intervention. The Canadian government requested the U.S. government if they could build a dam across the St. Lawrence River near Ogdensburg. It was a 900-foot dam. It was called the Gut Dam. And this dam restricted the flow and impeded the water flow from Lake Ontario down the St. Lawrence. And on average, it raised Lake Ontario's level 9 inches. Several years later, in 1943, there was a second man-made action. And this was the Ogoki and Long Lake diversions. The U.S. requested Canada during World War II to build some hydro dams to produce electricity to support the war effort. And in doing so, they diverted about 3 billion gallons of water a day that historically went into the Hudson Bay watershed into Lake Superior, raising the Great Lakes significantly. The combination of the Gut Dam impeding the flow out of the St. Lawrence and the diversions of water coming in that wasn't natural to the Great Lakes, then, and by 1945, had created the first recorded flooding conditions on Lake Ontario. At that time, my father, Harry Bolton, a civil engineer, and had worked on the Manhattan Project during the war, and Norm Atterbury, his neighbor, he was a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy stationed in the Pacific during the war and reported to Dwight D. Eisenhower. When they returned and they realized the high water condition, they immediately went to work. And they formed a nonprofit group almost identical to what we are doing today. And this nonprofit group had almost 3,000 people in it, which at that time was about everybody that lived on the south shore of Lake Ontario during that time. And in 1949, this group, the nonprofit group called the Lake Ontario Land Development and Beach Protection Association, filed a class action lawsuit against the Canadian government demanding that the Gut Dam be removed and that they get compensated for losses. So the lawsuit result was fairly swift. By October 29th, 1952, the IJC was forced to direct the removal of the Gut Dam. And by January 1953, the Gut Dam was removed. So you can see from the pictures below that we went from 1952 with flooding conditions back to the same area in Rochester to our beaches again by 1955. Their job wasn't done. Right after the Gut Dam was removed, they realized that the Canadian government, the shipping industry, and the U.S. government were planning the construction of the Seaway project. And the Seaway project had their own plan 2014 at that time. And it was called the Method of Regulation number 5. And it also planned to have lake levels above 249 feet above sea levels. And the riparians knew, and all the shoreline residents knew at that time, that anything above 247 feet above sea level would be imminent danger to their properties due to any wave or wind action. So the association then filed a lawsuit in federal court to block the construction of the Seaway project, which required the IJC to maintain the lake level between 242.7 and 246.7, a 4-foot range. And at that time, that was the foundation for Plan 1958D. And so the seaway was constructed, and by 1959, the seaway had opened up. But again, we had relatively normal water levels and our beaches were restored. But at the end of the 1960s, backed by the shipping industry, there was lawsuits presented to reduce the flow from the Chicago diversion. And in doing so, the shipping industry got a successful Supreme Court ruling that said that the Chicago diversion had to be cut back to 3,200 cubic feet per second, which is 3 times less than their highest flows in earlier years. So basically what this did, they didn't cut back the flow coming in from the Canadian diversion, so this tipped the balance in the Great Lakes. And for the next many years, the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there was sporadic flooding during those high water years. And that's because about twice as much water was coming in from the Canadian diversion as was going out in the Chicago diversion. So what's very frustrating in this whole fight against the high water is that all we hear from the IJC is this is Mother Nature and there's nothing can do. Well, in 1952, in 1973, and 1985, the governments worked together with the IJC and they shut down the Canadian diversions to help the high water flooding situation. And no such action is being done in today's environment. So as we go forward, in the 1980s there was another lawsuit. And this was by another group that was formed in Sodas. It was called the South Shore Council. And Don Ketchum, who was the president of the organization, filed suit with the South Shore Council against the New York and federal power authorities with a takings claim because their property was being taken unfairly under the Fifth Amendment. So in March of 1988, they again got a favorable ruling where Judge Michael Telesco in federal court denied the defendant's request to dismiss the case. So for several years we still had relatively low water again due to the pressure of the lawsuit and also the pressure from the riparian group. As we advance forward though, that got us to 2017. On January 1st, 2017, my property on Edgemere Drive in Greece had 20 foot of beach. And by May 1st of that year, we had 6 foot deep water off our break wall and the break wall collapsed. And it was the beginning of Plan 2014. So basically what had happened is that the Canadian diversions are still pumping in excess water into the Great Lakes. So all the Great Lakes are high. And 2014, is, from other presentations you've seen, has shown that we are holding the water from Montreal and the shipping industry to benefit them with no benefit for the St. Lawrence River and or Lake Ontario residents. And if you look at this graph, this is a graph right from the original plans. It shows we will exceed 251 feet above sea level at some point. And anybody that lives along the lake realize that's a level where our homes and our livelihoods are probably gone. So in the past, the groups have been successful 3 times to fight this problem. We need to continue to fight this problem. We will fight it, and we will win with your support. Thank you.